Hey guys, welcome back. Well, as you can notice, this isn't a normal documentary style video that I do for the various kinds of baseball sets. What I've thought about doing this time is trying out something like a companion video to the many videos that I do. In particular, this is for the 1974 TOPPS series. I found some things that are very interesting and interesting to the set, nuances, and things you may not know about the set. So let's go check these out as we take a look into more about 1974 TOPPS. So first off, I wanted to discuss the actual design, and we've always talked about 74 TOPPS as having a very minimalist kind of calm design, similar to 73. They both were calm, especially in an era of the 70s where, we had flashy and bright or muted colors, but they were bold. So there was something different that was done with this set that I like. And I did point out some things that I noticed, and this is not, by doing, digging into the minds of TOPPS and why they designed certain things like this. Just notice from my perspective. I mean, if you look at the card, you see that it's very minimal. It's got the white borders and then the small thin border around it of a color. So it does give some color to the card, but it's not like, bright 75 colors as we've seen with TOPPS. Also, if you notice where the name and the team are, at the top and the bottom of the card, it looks like a pennant. And I like that idea. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but it reminds me of like a flag or a pennant. And we talk about pennant races with baseball and pennant ideas. So that was really neat. And, the color I'm looking at really quick here on my screen, it's very, very well put together, very symmetrical. And like I discussed before, it's almost like a record. It looks like something you could file away. Because remember, these baseball cards, they weren't just baseball cards like you remember as kids. They were a record for that season, for that player. And we have to realize that for the baseball cards as well. They are a record for the future. People have these and say, this player played at this particular time, and I have a record of it, that baseball card. And I think that's the idea they were going for. I kind of, in my mind, I've had this, this idea of, filing in a filing cabinet or in a binder, as a lot of us did, putting cards into binders down the road. Not initially. I realized in the 70s there was not the idea of binders. I've read a lot of the comments, and it was more about, I had these cards and I traded them and I felt them in my hands. I didn't put them in a top loader and put them off to the side because I wanted to know the price of them, and what's the value, as it seems like cards are going to now. So I think that's the idea of what these cards did back then, is they were more of like, I wanted to collect the player because that was a record of the player that played at that particular moment and time. And we grab a connection with that, with the 74 TOPPS. So another aspect of the 74 series that I'm very interested in was the traded subset. Now, we know this came out later in production runs as players got traded, as players were roster call-ups from the minors. They, had these subsets of 44 cards in later packs of 74 TOPPS, as well as the later runs of the set that you could get through JCPenney. And, that's the interesting part, that these were later in the series. It didn't stop the series. It was just inserted into the series. So that was the interesting part. And there's some interesting things about the actual cards that I saw. A couple things. One very interesting point is, if you notice, there's all the airbrushed hats. They didn't just trade the player and put traded across the card and maybe put the name of the team. They wanted you to see and feel what that player looks like in his new, his new hat, or his, the top of the jersey or whatever. They wanted you to say, hey, this is what it looks like. So, for 1974 and TOPPS to do that, that was an awesome way to put you in the feeling of like, the card is keeping up with what is happening in baseball without changing the whole set. Obviously with today's technology, we would think, oh, that's second rate. But the idea was there. The idea was there to keep people, within the actual, this is what it is right now. This is who he plays for, Boston. We're going to have the Boston emblem, the Boston colors on the hat or whatever. But they wanted you to believe that. And that was a tiny aspect that I don't know if we really look into or think about. The other one was, if you look at the back of the card, it doesn't have stats. It doesn't have his, it's not a repeat of his card with his old team with the stats on the back. It was different. If you flip that card over, it has a newspaper headline that discusses the trade, maybe a little paragraph or two about the trade, who was traded, maybe the feelings. But Topps was intentional in putting that in there. It was once again a record of what happened. It wasn't just he was traded or this guy was called up to the major leagues. No, no. This was a newspaper heading. And I think that was a good and conscious decision by Topps to do that with the traded set. So that makes it very interesting for the collector because that does become a record. As we've talked about, these are records of players. Just like you make a record in a database or a record in a ledger. This was a record. Hey, he was traded. Let's show you the newspaper clipping on it. So those are some very interesting things that maybe you didn't know or maybe people didn't catch about the traded series from 1974. Another very interesting part about this set was at the time, the time period. As the sets we all know, they track a time period. This was 74, 73, 74. This was when San Diego was thinking about moving their team. I mean, the owner was getting ready to sell to ownership in Washington. There was a deal there to send that team. And it fell through at the last hour. Ray Kroc of McDonald's fame bought the team and kept him in San Diego. And Topps followed that pattern almost, if you want to see it that way. Early on in production, very early on, they created about 15 cards and removed Padres, kept the same card, but Padres was removed and it said Washington National League. Because at that period in time, they were going to be moving. There was a lot of, it was very close to being done. And, Topps was tracking it as that. Some say maybe they jumped the gun. Who's to say? But at that particular moment, San Diego was going to be Washington. And Topps was trying to compensate for that in their set because they were releasing everything at once. And after Ray Kroc brought the team and kept him in San Diego, they did. They had to change. But they didn't change the cards. The cards stayed the same. The structure stayed the same. The pennants on the top and the bottom, it stayed the same. It didn't change. They changed it back to San Diego. Those cards were, removed from the set. And, midway through and 3/4 of the way through the season, it was San Diego for those 15 players. There were some, these are considered kind of scarce air cards if you have one. Especially, I believe the Willie McCovey had the National League Washington on the pennants as the team names. But as you can see, that little change in direction, was that conscious by Top Standard. They didn't just stop the whole production and say, oh, we just got to shut it down. And how do we change this? How do we introduce this? Well, hey, as time changes, these cards changed. So we're just going to stop running the ones that aren't true anymore. And we'll jump back to what it is. It's San Diego Padres, and that's what it's going to be. So if you notice that, you see that change throughout the system. The cards don't change. The 660 cards don't change. They don't add it to the end of the set. No, just those existing cards, change the name, and we move on. The Rookie Cup, it was introduced in 1973 Topps as the Cup. We had the rookie statuette, I guess you'd call it, in the 60s and early 70s, and we moved to that cup in 73 with a redesign. But 74, it was omitted. And was it a design change? I've read some things about it. Was it just a design choice by Topps? But there was no reason or rhyme after they had just introduced this new redesigned cup for the rookies in 1973. And the interesting thing is it came back in 75. And then we don't see it again until 1987, and that cup has been there ever since. Obviously, it's not considered nowadays a rookie card. It's kind of like their second year, almost to designate that they were a rookie all-star the year before. But that's an interesting thing about 74, that the rookie cup was totally removed from the card design. Dave Winfield, I mean, you know him from the Padres and the Yankees. He played with many other teams. But his rookie card is from the 1974 Topps series. And the interesting point is, if you look at the card, it's the same as every other card. That's what's very interesting. And I know that's with past, past sets in that era too. And yeah, there was no designation. There was no RC at the top of the card. There was no inserts. There was no subsets. There was no Bowman first cards. It was just that card. It was a record at that time that this person was here and he was going to be a baseball player. That's all it said. It didn't have any background information for him. Dave Winfield at that time was considered a generational talent. He graduated from the University of Minnesota, went straight to the major leagues. He was drafted by the Padres. He was drafted by 4 teams in total, professional league teams. Padres, obviously. He was also drafted by the ABA Utah basketball team and the Atlanta Hawks of the NBA. And believe it or not, he was also drafted by the Minnesota Vikings of the NFL. So he had a lot of choices. Obviously, he chose baseball. Very good career choice. And but you see, even though that kind of talent today, he would be lauded from the heavens from from the TOPPS perspective and the card hobbies perspective. But back then, he was just a player. He had to prove himself first, and he surely did. But that's the interesting point in the differences. And back in '74, it shows that Dave Winfield was just at that time a reference, a player in time. But as you read the background of him, he was pretty an amazing athlete at that particular time, in the mid '70s. But TOPPS still treated him like he was just any other player. So as you can see, the 74 set has a lot of informational parts to it, some quirkiness, some nuances. For being a very basic card, there's no craziness as we see in 71 or 75. But it's a wonderful set. And I saw many comments in my last video about the 74 TOPPS where this was their favorite. These were a lot of collectors' favorite set. This was their set that they loved. And I too love clean designs. I have really grown a fondness to the 74 set. And I've, put that in my, wish list of some cards that I wanted to get, i.e. Dave Winfield rookie card. I'd love to get that card. But you see that even though a set may seem boring to some people, it has a lot of nuances and a lot of interesting points about it that I hope I brought out in this companion video. And if you like these ideas, I may continue them. I want to get your feedback because these are new things I'm trying to add more insight, more information to the card set or to every video. I may not do this for every video, but videos I deem that have a lot of information, and some of it may be more factual than the feeling of the video. So please leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think. If this is a good idea, if, hey, stick with the documentary kind of style videos. I really like those, which I will. I'm not getting rid of those. These are a companion video, a little fireside chat as we call it. So thank you once again for watching. And please, if you feel like it, subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it. And we'll see you once again as we go beyond the cardboard.